Good morning. I got some of y'all. We'll try it again. Good afternoon. Outstanding. Still some good mornings in there. That's all right. I was a little bit worried about bringing a lesson at 3:30 in the afternoon after lunch. At 3:30, well, you guys know that's nap time, and especially after lunch. I was thinking about this when I saw the schedule came out, and I thought, what was Robert trying to do to me? Yeah, Si's used to people sleeping anyway, We'll give him the 3:30 spot. Good to see everyone's awake. I hope everyone had a fantastic lunch. I did. I had to go get coffee afterward because we went to a buffet. And it's biblical now, right? Buffet your body. It's biblical, but I ate a little too much and started getting that warm puppy syndrome. When a puppy stuffed its belly and then they lay in front of the fireplace and it's just time for a nap. So I had to get some coffee, get going. So if you need to, grab some coffee because I want you to stay awake for this. It is very, very good to be here with all of you. I'm glad you could all make it, and thank you, Valley Congregation, for hosting this. This is fantastic. Thank you for allowing me to bring a lesson. I really love lectureships. I really, really love these. I'm supposed to bring a lesson and edify everyone, and I can guarantee you I get a lot more out of this than I could possibly give everyone here. It's a great reminder to me every year. Coming from a small place like Nikiski, it is such a fantastic reminder that my church family is much bigger than my home congregation. And so I really, really enjoy being here with all of you. Thank you for being here. It's a great encouragement to me, and I do consider you my family. And that's what we're going to talk about today is victory in family, victory in our marriages, victory in our homes, victory through our faith. And there are a lot of different kinds of families out there. We look at families, they come in all shapes and sizes. There are some crazy families, some kooky families. There are all kinds of different families, and there are lots of labels for families these days. We hear of mixed families, blended families, step families, foster families, adoptive families, all kinds of families. And I know we've had other kinds of families too. Maybe you have groups who you consider family as well, like a military family or firefighters and medics and police, high-stress jobs where they really got to work as a team. Often consider each other family, and sports families. We've had a wrestling family and different kinds of families. And I certainly hope that you consider the church your family, because God does. Galatians 4:6 says, "And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father." Do you call God Father? If you do, that makes us family. That means we are brothers and sisters. Get used to that, because if we are brothers and sisters, that means we're going to be stuck together for eternity in heaven. So get used to one another. I know heaven's going to be a big place, but it's not going to be big enough for us to get away from each other. So get used to loving each other, because we're going to be doing that for all eternity. And it doesn't matter who your brother or sister are, whether you like them or not. That annoying brother who just loves to give you a hearty slap on the back after giving you that pick you up off the floor and shake you to have to death kind of hug? Guess what he's going to be doing for all eternity? That sister who insists that you have another plate of that awful Spam fried rice or whatever it is that she brings to every potluck, guess who's going to be feeding you that for all eternity? Actually, I'm not sure Spam's going to make it into heaven. Sorry, Beth. Your preacher who blabbers on far too long every Sunday, guess who's going to have no time limits in heaven for all eternity? That's right, Mike. Oh, no. And those corny preacher jokes, they're just going to go on and on and on. That preacher's going to have all eternity to hit you with those gems. Like, for example, what kind of man was Boaz before he married? Ruthless. That's good. What do they call church elders in Germany? German shepherds. I like that one. All right, everybody has to quiet down now. And you know why it's necessary to be quiet in church? Because people are sleeping. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. I want to introduce you to a family this morning. This family was what we might consider an average American family. You know, they lived in just a quaint little suburban neighborhood. Nothing special. You know, they didn't live in the slums, and they weren't real upper class. They were what you might call average. They had what appeared to be this prim and proper house in a pretty nice little neighborhood. They had a well-manicured lawn. They had nice shrubbery and flowers and clean cars parked in the driveway. And by looking at the outside, it looked like they were just a good, happy, doing fine kind of family. They looked like, on the outside, a typical American family. The problem is that in reality, it was what we might even consider as now a typical American family. That family was a wreck on the inside. It was full of dysfunction. It was a family that we would look at and say, that family is a mess. And we would say, what is wrong with those folks? And we would say things like, those poor kids. This was a family of 2 parents and several children. And it was a mess. There was no encouragement. There was no support. There was never any building the children up. There was never any, let's go family, we're a team. We're in this together. The kids were constantly the victim of emotional abuse, being torn down daily. They were verbally assaulted on a regular basis. It was very clear to them that they were worthless, that they would never amount to anything, that they weren't important or really that cared for. There was physical abuse. There was drug abuse. There was alcohol abuse. And the marriage was a mess too. The mom and dad, boy, they had a lot of troubles, as you might imagine. And they were screaming and yelling, and there were insults and violence and constant volatility and instability. There were divorce threats. There were always doors slamming and things breaking and more drinking and more drugs and increasing problems. It was like a big snowball rolling downhill. But you know, they're not the only family like that. The reality is, our nation is filled with families like that. Broken families, broken marriages, if people even bother to get married to begin with. Marriage is kind of seen as a nuisance because when you decide to part, you've got to do all kinds of legal nonsense. Just easier not to ever be married. That's how a lot of people view marriage today. There are a lot of families like this. One of the things that I have always enjoyed about Alaska is that we can kind of look down at America and see some of the major issues down in America, and it would take some time before it would get to us here in Alaska. And we kind of had a heads up. There's a little bit of a separation there. But you know, over the past several years, that separation has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. A couple years ago, I would have said, if there's an issue down in America, it will still be about 2 years before we've really got to deal with that issue here in Alaska. Sometimes now, it's almost instant. That separation has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And so Alaska, just like the other 52, 53 states, I can't keep up with it anymore. We have so many answers to that question now. It's full of broken families and wrecked marriages. People who are hurting need answers. Have you seen one of these families? Are you maybe familiar with some families who are like that? If not, you need to get out and meet your neighbors. You need to go meet your coworkers. You need to maybe invite some folks over for dinner if you're not familiar with a family who is like this. Have you seen or do you know any children from a family in which mom and dad are addicted to drugs or alcohol or some other kind of addiction? Have you ever seen a family in which the parents are basically absent parents and the kids are basically raising themselves? Maybe you're familiar with a family in which the parents are simply under-functioning. They don't really want to do their job as parents. Maybe you see some families where the parents are over-functioning and they are rulers and overlords and they abuse their power over their children. Have you ever seen a family in which violence prevails? Where it's a constant volatile mix that could explode anytime? Have you seen a family in which the child or children are used as pawns by the parents against one another? Have you ever seen a family in which the child or children are neglected? Maybe you've seen a family in which the child or the children are the victim of some kind of abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. These things are all too prevalent in our society, even here in Alaska. And you're familiar with how these things affect the children. The children often lash out in rebellion or some other kind of antisocial behavior, maybe even destructive behavior. We see them constantly getting into fights, vandalizing things, getting involved in petty crimes. They have troubles at school, maybe even become bullies and victimize other people. Sometimes they're involved in self-destructive behavior, self-harm, suicide attempts, substance abuse, promiscuity. Sometimes they simply become withdrawn and they become that weird kid who won't ever talk to anyone. Sometimes that leads to them becoming victims of bullies themselves. They all have issues coping with the normal, everyday stresses of life. And how about the marriages in these kinds of households? Unfortunately, that's not even a fair statement to say the marriages in these households, because that's so rare now. Often they're not married at all. We see common relationship problems. How about scorekeeping? You seen that? Why did you do this? Well, you did this, and then last week you did this, and for the past 3 months you... Finger pointing, always blaming each other, never owning up to anything. Couples who are completely untrusting of one another. Maybe that's earned. People who are abusive to one another. People who live separate lives together. Maybe even people who farm out the sacred areas of marriage to someone else. Striving for emotional support, friendship, companionship, even a sexual relationship. Things that destroy marriages, destroy families. And then there's always those folks who are married, but always have a bag packed, ready to leave. Always ready to go get those papers drawn up. These are families in America today. These are families in Alaska. These are the families who surround us and maybe sometimes are within us. I refer to this, the problem that I want to address, as the devil's chain. You can call it whatever you want, but I think of this as a chain. The devil is always trying to get his hands in things and mess people up. The more he can mess up people's lives, the better for him. And he's even trying to wrap people up in chains before they ever even grow up. And that's what he's doing in these kinds of families, in these situations. He's trying to wrap those kids up before they even get to grow up. And they grow up with such a bad example. They don't know any different. And so that's one of the worst consequences of all, of these kinds of situations, is that they are self-perpetuating. These kids who are raised in these kinds of situations, they grow up, they become adults who start families, and they recreate what they were brought up in. They recreate the marriage or the relationship that was modeled to them. They recreate the family life that they grew up in. They recreate that brokenness, and they think that that's how things are supposed to be. And that's the sad truth, is so many of these people don't know that life doesn't have to be that way. And they don't know that a marriage can be a good, nurturing, positive, wonderful, beautiful thing. They don't know that having a family can give you things that nothing else in this life can give you. They don't know that some of these kids don't know what it's like to live in a stable, supporting, nurturing, loving, godly household. They have never seen it. Some adults don't know what it's like to have a loving spouse. And they honestly don't know what it's like to have security in a marriage. And the problems just keep perpetuating. One link adds to the next, and it keeps going on, generation after generation. The problem gets worse and worse and worse. That chain wraps up another family, and another family, and another family. But let me introduce you to another family, okay? We're going to like this family. This is going to be a positive family here, okay? This other family looks very different from the families we've looked at previously. Even though one of those parents was raised in a destructive household. Even though one of those parents was raised with a very poor example of marriage, with constant fighting and distrust and abuse. He had bad examples of relationships all around. Relationships consisted of lying and selfishness and control and using fear to manipulate people. He had bad examples of what it was supposed to be parenting, what parenting was supposed to look like. Parenting, the example he got was that parenting meant keeping your kids under your thumb through abuse and fear and preying on their insecurities. So this guy went into his marriage with plenty of baggage. He didn't know how to communicate with a wife. He didn't know how to raise children. He certainly did not know how to be the head of a household and create a positive, nurturing, loving environment. And yet, that kid grew up and started a family, and he has a fantastic marriage. He and his wife get along great. They have a wonderful marriage. He's got a bunch of kids, and the kids are nurtured and cared for, and they know that they are loved, and they are incredible people. How is that? And we see over and over and over again that a person who is raised in a family like that recreates that environment when they start a family. What could break that link? How could a person who had such poor examples and such a twisted picture of marriage and family ever have a functioning family? What would give a person like that the right picture? Where could he or she find the ingredients for a successful marriage? How could he or she learn how to treat a spouse? Where could they go to find the principles for successful child rearing? Where could a person like that go to find living examples of thriving, healthy, loving families? To whom could he or she turn with difficult questions concerning the intricacies of family life? Well, I'm sure you're way ahead of me. I'm sure you've got the answer. You know, God has been interested in this from the very beginning. And God has consistently given people instructions on how to raise children and how to give them the example of being a God-fearing person. Well, way back in Deuteronomy even, Deuteronomy 4, 9 and 10 says, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. How on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on earth, and that they may teach their children so. Pretty straightforward. Teach our children. Deuteronomy 6 through 9. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Surround them with God's word. Surround them with instruction. Let them see that that's what life is all about. Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. Provide children with discipline. Pretty straightforward. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We like to stress here, and appropriately so, train up a child in the way he should go. Yes, absolutely, but I want to point out something else here. Train up a child in the way he should go. Now, here's why I bring this up. I've got 4 kids, so I've had 4 2-year-olds. I've had more than that because I've taken in some other kids, and I know some of you have, where are the Boswells? How many 2-year-olds have they had? I mean, 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds are famous for being difficult, right? And you come home from a hard day at work, and you just want to kick back on the couch for just a little while and relax. And the 2-year-old senses that. God put something in their head. I'm convinced. They know Mom wants to relax. Dad wants to relax. Oh, it was a tough day. I'm going to crank it up a notch. We're going to really push some boundaries here because they won't get up off the couch. They don't want to get off the couch. Why is that? When the 2-year-old really acts up. Because that's when I need to train up a child in the way he should go. We've got to get up off the couch, chase that 2-year-old down, and let them know they've done wrong. Let them know it's not acceptable, because if you'll do it when they're 2, you won't have to do it when they're 14, when you can't chase them down. Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. These things are fairly simple, but they take time with our children. And that's the one thing that we simply cannot get back when it goes away. Train up a child. Take that time when they're children to teach them what is right and wrong, and to model what a servant of the Lord is. That's how God provides victory in our families. That's how our faith brings victory into our homes today, in this life, right now. God provides victory in our marriages in a very similar way. What do you suppose is the recipe for successful marriage? There are a lot of components, but if we boil everything down to its simplest state, I would suggest to you that the recipe for successful marriage, very simple. It is husband plus wife plus God. Okay, when we get married, there are 3 individuals in this marriage covenant. A husband and God. And there's a 4th one trying to get in there. and we've got to keep him out. Think about Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, first husband and wife. I bet they had the absolute perfect marriage when it was just the two of them and God in the garden. It was perfect. God created Adam. And the first thing he said was, it's not good for this guy to be alone. And I conjure up some pretty crazy things because I'm a guy and I know what it's like when my wife leaves. I know what happens, and it's not a good thing. I need some help, okay? I picture Adam there, and he does a little work in the garden, and he decides to take a break, and he goes and he throws rocks at the lions, just asking for trouble. And then maybe he goes and does a little more work, and then he takes a break, and he's poking alligators with a sharp stick, and then he gets hungry, and he goes and he sits down, and there's Adam sitting there eating some dirt, because he's a guy, and without our wives, that's what we do. And I know this is true, because just recently, my wife had to take one of our boys up to Anchorage for surgery, so they were gone a couple days. So what are we going to eat? Well, let's see what's in the refrigerator. I don't want any of that stuff. Let's check the freezer. Hey, look, ice cream. All right, everybody, Dad's making ice cream for dinner. That's not healthy enough, Si. You can't do that. All right, let's see what else we've got to add to the ice cream. Chocolate syrup. No, you can't do that. That's not. Wait a minute. Chocolate comes from a tree, so it's a vegetable. Okay, so that's good. We'll put chocolate syrup. Oh, look, some cashews. Perfect. There we go. That's what we ate for like 2 days. So I know Adam was sitting there in the garden without a wife. He was eating dirt or whatever he could come across, I guess. And God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. He needs a helper. And he made Eve. And first he brings all the animals to Adam. Adam gets to name them all, and none of them are a helper for him. None of them are suitable for him. And he brings Eve. Whoa. I like this one, Lord. She's beautiful. Yeah, guess what, Adam? That's your wife. She is all yours, and you are all hers. Lord, I want to kiss her. That's right. You got the right idea. You know what your job? Your job is to work and start a family with her. And it was Adam and Eve and God. And then the devil got in there. And there goes their perfect marriage. Genesis chapter 3, verse 11 and 12. After the Lord approaches them about their sin, and Adam replies, the woman that you gave to be with me. Can you imagine that? And there's Adam and Eve and God says, what have you done? You did something I told you absolutely not to do. Adam, what do you have to say for yourself? This is like a parent talking to his children. What do you have to say for yourself? It's her fault, Lord. Can you imagine how that went over later on that night? Yeah. That was when Adam invented the world's first couch and discovered that it gets cold on the couch alone at night. There goes their perfect marriage because they let the devil get between them and God. Do you suppose that if a husband were doing all he could do to be like Jesus, and his wife, she was doing all she could do to be like Jesus, and God was doing everything he could do to make them like Jesus, that marriage would ever fail? That would be pretty tough to make that marriage fail. Marriage takes two people and God, two people who are striving to be servants of God, two people striving to be like Jesus. Because if I'm trying to be like Jesus, how do you suppose I treat my wife? If she's trying to be like Jesus, how do you suppose she treats me? That's going to work out great. Who am I going to put first? Me or her? Who is she going to put first? See, I don't have to put me first. She's putting me first. And she doesn't have to put her first because I'm putting her first. Well, second, next to God, of course. God gives us plenty of instruction for marriage. There's one place that I like to go to where we see that husband and wife have this equal responsibility. That's 1 Corinthians 7, where we read this. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Now, that doesn't mean we can start a fight with each other and say, okay, wife, the Lord says you can't kick me out of the bed and put me on the couch tonight. It doesn't work that way. But that sometimes is how women use their bodies as weapons against their husbands. Because they know that their husbands think that they're beautiful, and they want to sleep in the same bed with them, and they simply deny them that. God says we don't do that with our bodies. Men use their bodies as weapons against their wives because they are bigger and stronger, and they can be threatening with their bigger and stronger bodies. And they can slam doors, and they can punch things, and they can throw stuff, and all too often they get physical with their wives. And God says, no, we do not use our bodies that way. We use our bodies for the benefit of our spouses. We use our bodies to help them be pure, to help them to be holy, to help them to be good Christians, to help them stay away from temptation, to help them not let the devil into the relationship. The husband-wife dynamic. God has some things that he says to both, and then he has some things that he says to wives and some things that he says to husbands. And to wives, he says some things that sometimes we don't like Ephesians 5:22 and following. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Wives, submit to your own husbands. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying you always want to do that. In fact, we'll have a look at that in a second here. 1 Peter 3, verse 1 says, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands. Pretty much saying the same thing. 1 Peter 3, verse 5 and 6 says, for this is how holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. I was such a stinker to my wife. Years ago, I would call her from work. Hey, honey, I need you to do me a favor. Go to 1 Peter chapter 3. Okay, I hear get out the Bible, and she's on the phone. I can hear the pages turning. And now, read me verse 6. Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him. Hey! Guys, don't do that to your wives, okay? To husbands. He has a lot to say to husbands. Basically, he says to wives, submit. To husbands, he's got a lot more to say to us, guys. Hey, don't, it's not my word, it's God's word, okay? He's the one saying more to us than to women. Ephesians 5:25 and following. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. 1 Peter 3:7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Oh, now wait a minute. I've got to stop there for a second. Well, what does he mean calling women weaker vessels? There are a lot of ideas on this passage. I'm going to give you my take. A lot of folks say women are emotionally weaker. I can, for every argument that says that women being emotional is a weakness, I can give you an equal argument saying that is a strength. And that men have an emotional deficit, and that is a weakness. I don't think this is talking about emotions. It's certainly not talking about intelligence. Folks, this is talking about them being physically not as strong as men. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, very good reason that the Lord addresses this. We're going to come to that in a second. Live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. In Ephesians 5:33, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Now here's how these verses all translate into marriage. Everyday marriage, okay? Men, he says, love your wife. You would think that's a given. Well, why do you think I married her? It doesn't work that way. Guys, we love lots of stuff. We love working. We love accomplishing big things. We love killing big animals. We love catching big fish. We love playing sports. We love winning the game. We'll put a lot of time and effort into those kinds of things that we love. And God says, love your wife. Do we need to spend time with our wives? Do we need to put a lot of effort into our relationship with our wives? I put a lot of time and effort into things that I love. Is my wife at the top of that list? Why does God tell us this, guys? Because we don't need to hear it? He says to live with them in an understanding way. How many of us have heard that thing about guys trying to figure out women? Just can't figure them out, right? I give up. I quit trying to figure out women a long time ago, right? God says, try to understand them. What do you have to do to understand something? Well, pick any subject in the world you want. What do you have to do to try to understand that? It takes time, effort, dedication. Am I going to have to spend some time with my wife to understand her? He says to show her honor as the weaker vessel. Show her honor as the weaker vessel. Talking about a woman's relative physical weakness compared to her husband. And God addresses this because of that issue that we see that happens far too often. This is saying, husbands, do not use your physical strength to rule your household with an iron fist. Don't try to force your wife into submission by intimidating her because you're bigger and stronger and you can hurt her. It is absolutely 100% wrong. The words for weaker vessel, we could legitimately translate that into today's vernacular would be like saying fine china. You honor her like she is the fine china. She's not your average plate or dish or bowl. She's not one that you throw down on the table and when the kids knock it off and it shatters into pieces, you go, that's okay, we got 7 more. She's like the fine china. And where does that go? Oh, that goes up in a fancy cabinet behind closed glass where it is protected. It doesn't just get thrown around like any other thing. It is loved and cherished and protected and treated differently from all the other things. God says to honor her as the weaker vessel. Guys, our job is to be the leaders in our households. The trick is to be worthy of submitting to. And we probably won't make it. We're not going to make it like the Lord is worthy of submitting to, but we're supposed to try. Our wives are to submit to us, and we are try to live up to that in our leadership. Here's how I want my wife to think of me, okay? I want my wife to think of me like I am Superman, her personal Superman. And I think of Song of Solomon. I love this. As an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. When my wife thinks about me, I want her to think so highly of the dedication and effort and work that I have put into leading our household and being a godly man. I want her to think things like this. I want her writing poetry about me. Wives, the Lord says basically the same thing in a couple of different ways. Submit to him. So submit to your husband. He doesn't say if he's worth it. He doesn't say if he's putting enough effort into it in your estimation. He doesn't say if you think he's worthy of it. He's not. But he can't lead you if you don't submit to him. He can't lead you. He can't be the leader of the household if you won't submit, because you're equals. Submission is amongst equals. If you won't submit, how can he possibly be a leader? Guys, if you won't lead, what's she supposed to submit to? You can see how these things work hand in hand. Genesis 3:16, God said to Eve after they had sinned, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Women, I'm so sorry about that. That's a terrible thing. But listen to this. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That means you're going to be so head over heels in love with this guy, you just can't hardly stand it, right? That's how you think of your husband, right? Yeah, not. That means you're going to want to take the lead. But he's going to rule over you. You've got to submit and let him take the lead. He says, respect your husband, because he's trying to step up and be the leader that God is calling him to be. I think Colossians 3:18 and 19 sums it up nicely, puts both of these things in the same couple verses here. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Pretty straightforward. Again, why does God have to tell wives to submit to their husbands? Because they don't need to hear it? And why does God need to tell husbands to love their wives, honor them, and be understanding toward them? See, it's because we tend to not do these things. So God needs to tell us, here's your focus. Here's what you need to work on. Here's what makes a godly marriage. These are our weaknesses, whether we like it or not. These are our weaknesses. Here's the beautiful thing about weaknesses. I love this passage, and I think this applies to so many different areas in our life. 2 Corinthians 12:9. This is when Paul complained about that thorn in his side. Prayed 3 times that the Lord would remove it, but the Lord's response was this: my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Where you are strong, you won't let God help you. Where you are weak, you've got all God has to offer. So your weakness plus God's power is far greater than your strengths. And so how this works in a marriage is it's like hippos and birds. Okay? Kind of a crude analogy for marriage, but think about those big old hippos. You know, we're talking about like 2,000 plus pounds of muscle and just big eating machine. And they've got, you know, these mouths that are they're kind of like preachers. They've got really big mouths. And they've got like over 2,000 pounds of crushing pressure. And then you got these little frail birds that hang out with the hippos, just waiting for them to open their mouth so they can hop inside the mouth and start picking around and cleaning out their mouths. And that hippo could just snap down on that bird and demolish it easily. It wouldn't even be a problem. But that bird knows that the hippo is not going to do it. Why? Because they work together. They benefit one another. Each one plays its part, and the other one benefits from it. The hippo gets his mouth cleaned. It's like going to the dentist all the time, only maybe not as painful, probably a little more, a little better than that. And what does the bird get? The bird gets a great meal. According to the bird, I wouldn't eat it. It's beneficial. Each one has its role. And when they fulfill that role, the relationship works. It's a cycle. Ladies, submit to your husbands and respect them. And it feeds their love. Husbands, love your wives. And it feeds their respect. And the relationship works beautifully. Guys, it's not too difficult. We talk about not being able to understand women, trying to figure them out, and sometimes I feel like the Lord's yelling at me, and I just can't hear him, and he's like, buy flowers. Help with dishes. Cook dinner. Don't just feed the kids ice cream. Well, simple things. Ladies, we don't always lead like we should. But God says to submit. Respect us. Try to convince us that we are your supermen. Victory in our marriages through our faith. And I got one thing to say about faith real quickly. Where the rubber meets the road, the feet hit the street, however you want to put it. The reality is that our faith in our everyday lives, certainly in our families and our marriages, faith means trusting God enough to put forth effort to doing it the way He says. I mean, that is just the bottom line in our everyday lives, doing it the way God says. And when we do that with our marriages, we have victory. And when we have victory in our marriages, we have the foundation for victory in our families. And victory in our families can break that chain and begin a new chain, a positive chain. It goes from one generation to the next. When Robert called me and told me about some of the ideas they had come up with for this lectureship, this one jumped out at me, and I hesitated at first. And I decided that I should do this lesson. Because that person that I told you about, that grew up in that horrible household, that was me. I know Robert kind of mentioned that. I didn't have a good upbringing. I never had a good dad. I never had a loving household until I met the church. God broke that chain only because I have faith. And I've strived to do things God's way. And from now on, there's a new chain. My kids were raised the right way. They know how to treat their future spouses. They know how to treat their children. They know how to live a godly life. It's not because of my doing. It's because God can break those chains. It's because you can have victory in your marriage. It's because you can have victory in your family. You can have victory over this world. You have victory in your life because of your faith in our wonderful God. He can do those things. I just want to end by encouraging you to do things God's way. That's what faith means in our everyday, moment-to-moment life. Do it God's way. Trust that it will work out. Because I know from firsthand experience, that whatever it is that the devil's trying to work in your life, God will overcome it through your faith. Thank you.
Amen. So